friends, welcome back, or welcome if you're new here. My name is Stacy and I am the Chapter Conundrum, and in today's video I want to talk to you guys about books that I wish that I could read again for the first time. I wish that I had known to savor these books, that they were going to be a special experience for me at the time that I read them. And yeah, I just want to talk about those today. When I was putting together this list, I realized it was more or less like plot things that have me kind of feeling like I wish I could read these again for the first time. There are a lot of books that I was kind of considering where I thought, oh, well, actually, this could be just as great on reread too. You know, it was a special experience for me the first time I read it, but I don't know that it would be like a way diminished experience on reread. So the ones that actually stuck through and made the final cut are ones that I wish I could experience the plot again for the first time. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into it, starting with a few thrillers. And the first one of those that I'm going to talk about is The Passengers by John Mars. And essentially this is set in a near future situation. It's more of a sci-fi thriller where we have self-driving cars, and I think 8 of them are hacked and set on a collision course with each other. And this hacking is being broadcast at a public hearing, and they are supposed to kind of weigh and consider which people should live, which ones maybe shouldn't make it, and it leads to a broader conversation that's pretty interesting as well. So the reason I wish that I could read this again for the first time is mainly all of the reveals. So in here, you're following a bunch of the different characters and you're slowly uncovering maybe why they are elected to be in the position that they are, or like what about them sets them apart from the other people involved in this hacking. And there's also a lot to unpack about the other character in here that's not in the hacking and why she is involved in the story. So yeah, just like the pacing of this one had me on the edge of my seat, and the reveals throughout were really fascinating for me the first time I read this. And definitely I wish I had known more to kind of savor this one as I was reading, because it definitely was something special. I have since reread this one, and while I still enjoyed the reread experience, it definitely wasn't the same. So yeah, this definitely belongs on this list for me. The next thriller I want to talk about is a polarizing one, but it is The House Across the Lake by Riley Sager. And I think part of what made this so interesting for me is that I read this pretty much on release day, and so I hadn't seen people mention how disappointed they were. Literally all I knew was that it was the new Sager and I wanted to jump into it, and I had heard that it had some mixed reviews, but I didn't realize that they were as polarizing as they were. And when I first started in this, I was like, okay, I mean, it's not super exciting. It took a while to kind of get into things, but then I got the main reveal of this and my mind was blown. I had never felt more duped by a thriller in my life, and that's an experience that I would love to relive again reading for the first time. Now, I will say this is one where the twist will make it or break it for a lot of people, and for me it was a make it situation, and I get that not everyone's going to have that experience, but this is definitely one that still stands out to me years later. And essentially in here you follow, I think it's Casey. Yeah, Casey. I can actually remember a character name for once. Look at me. And she is an actress who's kind of going through some stuff. So she goes to the family lake house to kind of have some downtime. And while she's there, she is kind of noticing that the couple across the lake have a bit of an interesting relationship where maybe not everything is as it seems. And when the wife half of this couple vanishes, Casey starts to have some pretty serious questions about what the heck is going on. My last thriller on here is Confessions by Kanai Minato, and this is a Japanese translated thriller, and essentially in here you follow a school teacher who is deciding to retire. And the book opens with her teaching her final class, but she's pretty young to retire, and so there is kind of a situation that has spurned this decision. And in this final lecture, she talks about what led to her decision, and the event that sort of spurned this is the catalyst for how the story goes. So from there, in every chapter you follow a different perspective, and each one has sort of something that contributes to the story of the situation that prompted her decision. So for me, this was the first time I had kind of experienced that storytelling style, and I really liked how it was done in here. Not every POV was as riveting as the others, but there were definitely some standout moments in here that I still remember my reaction to, and definitely this is something that I would love to experience again for the first time. This was actually the first book that I can remember audibly gasping as I read a reveal, and that's definitely a fun memory to have. Moving on to some sci-fi, I want to talk about Ready Player One. So this is kind of special twofold for me. The first is that this was one of my very early audiobook experiences, and I really enjoyed Will Wheaton's narration of this story. So that's definitely a memorable aspect of this read for me that I would love to experience again, since I had such a good time with that. But more than that, I would love to experience this story again for the first time. And this follows Wade Watts, who is a teenager kind of in a near future dystopian version of our world, where things have gone really wrong, but most people kind of escape their reality into a virtual world called the Oasis. And the Oasis is really like a lit RPG world, but it's expanded so much in popularity that it ended up incorporating kind of some real life aspects inside the game world. So you have things like school courses or homework within the Oasis that you can do, which is kind of neat. So I really enjoyed kind of uncovering how society sort of changed and what new dynamics they had based on this world. But the plot of this really kicks off when you find out Wade Watts, the main character, uncovers an Easter egg for a massive kind of like scavenger hunt that the creators of the game world have left for the people playing it. And his discovery spurs a big race to the finish to find the remaining Easter eggs and clues. And I really enjoyed kind of the tension and how that storyline unfolded. I definitely appreciated kind of all of the clues and Easter eggs that were put in there. And further to that, I also really appreciated kind of like all the nerdy 80s nostalgic things. I mean, I was born in the 90s, but I still experienced a lot of the things that were popular in the 80s because I had older siblings. And so it was definitely a fun reading experience for me, even though I wasn't around in the 80s. But yeah, something about the combination of the tense storyline along with some fun nostalgia in one of my early audio experiences that I had a great time with made this really extra memorable for me, and I definitely wish that I could go back and kind of re-experience that combo. The next sci-fi we have to talk about is Ogres by Adrian Tchaikovsky. And this is a short sci-fi novella that it's really kind of better to go into not really knowing a whole lot, but the really just basic gist is that you have humans and their ogre landlords are coming to town. Things go very wrong on their visit here, and our main character is on the run after that. And as you keep reading, he slowly kind of uncovers another layer and another layer and another layer to how this society is set up, how it became what it was, how it functions. And it's just a really kind of mind-blowing reading experience for that reason. So normally I really struggle with books that kind of don't give you a ton of context up front, but this is definitely the exception to the rule in this case, because I felt like it gave you enough context for what the character was experiencing in the moment, and then you further kind of got to unpeel the layers of like the bigger picture. And because I still kind of had context for the characters experiencing and like their inner monologue and thought processes, it still worked very well for me. But mainly I just got a lot of joy from discovering kind of the next layer and the next layer and the next layer to this one. And I definitely had a really good time with all the reveals here. And definitely that's not going to be the same on reread. In fact, I have reread this since and definitely agree that, you know, the first reading experience was kind of like the ultimate reading experience with this one. So yeah, definitely one I wish I could experience again for the first time. Then the last sci-fi we've got to talk about today is a favorite, Golden Sun by Pierce Brown, the second book in the Red Rising series. And I did enjoy Red Rising for sure, but I did think that that one was actually better on reread because I was kind of more invested in the characters and the story from there and kind of was like noticing a little bit more foreshadowing. But Golden Sun, man, this was kind of like the one where I really realized that Pierce Brown was not going to be afraid to hurt his readers. Like, he did not pull his punches in here. There were some interesting plot surprises. The stakes and the tension just felt really elevated compared to how they were in the first book. And I think it was largely because I was just a lot more invested by this point. And I don't know if it was like just kind of spending more time with the characters to get there, or if it was just like something in the writing kind of shifted. But definitely this is one that I wish I could experience for the first time over and over and over again, because my mind was completely blown. I also will say I do really love the narrator for this series, Tim Gerard Reynolds. I think he does an excellent job. And this again was another kind of one that was sort of earlier in when I started listening to audiobooks, so it definitely holds a special place in my heart for that reason as well. Book 1 in the series, Red Rising, does definitely kind of introduce you to the fact that the main character, Darrow, is going to be a little bit morally gray. But Golden Sun is kind of when you go further down that rabbit hole a little bit. And yeah, I just really enjoyed experiencing kind of like his character progression, even though it can be frustrating at times, coupled with all of the crazy plot reveals and just the aspects to this that kind of pulled on my heartstrings, and I was thoroughly invested in this and definitely wish I could read it again for the first time. Moving on to some fantasy romance, we're going to talk about Gleam, and this is the third book in the Plated Prisoner series. And this is a series that follows Orin, who is essentially enslaved to King Midas, and this is kind of like a loose King Midas reimagining, but she is kept in this cage. And very early on in book 1, you find out, wait a minute, she actually enjoys being in this cage. She feels safe there. She feels protected. And so immediately I had questions about her backstory, because I was like, okay, what made her think this way? Like, why is she the way that she is? And plot events in book 1 have her out of her cage for the first time in a long time, and things go from there. But book 3 in the series, Gleam, is kind of really when a lot of things come to a head. This is really when you start to uncover more aspects of the world. The scope of the story broadens. You get more perspectives. You get really satisfying kind of character moments. And this is also the installment where the romance really comes to the forefront of the series. This is one of those books that kind of changes everything you thought you knew from the previous books. And yeah, it's just such a satisfying reading experience for many, many reasons. I do also remember this entry being more of an emotional roller coaster ride. So there were definitely moments in here that ripped my heart out. There were moments in here that had me cheering, and there were very cathartic moments where I was like, oh, finally. And there were also moments where I was like on the edge of my seat trying to figure out what was going to happen. So yeah, definitely one that had me fully invested that I wish I could read again for the first time. The other fantasy romance that has to be here for me is the ACOTAR series by Sarah J. Maas. So Court of Thorns and Roses, along with the following books. And for me specifically, I'm going to say the first trilogy. I didn't really love Silver Flames as much, since it didn't have as good of a balance between like the plot, the world building, the romance, and the character work. That one really kind of more focused on the character and romance, and sort of left like the plot and world building aspects to the background or the side. So really the first 3 books in the trilogy that had kind of a more balance between those factors are what stand out in my brain. And if you somehow still don't know what this series is about, it follows our main character, Feyre, who is helping her family kind of survive. They've been struggling to make a living, and one day she is out in the woods hunting, and she shoots a wolf that she finds out later was actually a fae. And she has another fae show up at her door and demand retribution for this kill. And essentially as part of that, she ends up whisked away to live at his manor. And if you don't know this about me, my favorite fairy tale growing up was Beauty and the Beast, which this definitely draws inspiration from in book 1. It really does kind of become more of its own thing as the series progresses, but that's really kind of like the starting point for the series. And so I liked really experiencing a retelling of that had my investment very high. But more than that, I really enjoyed how the plot unfolded. I liked the trials aspect in book 1. I loved how the scope of the story expanded and sort of changed your perspective and changed what you thought you knew. I definitely liked how kind of everything wrapped up nicely with the main plot of this in book 3. And this was also kind of the first experience I had where I picked up a book that was really hyped, and I finally understood, okay, this actually really deserves the hype that it gets. Prior to reading this, I had been picking up some other books that had been recommended, and I just really didn't get it. I was like, I don't understand the love for this to the degree that people love it. And so it was just a really fun experience to have that sort of like, oh, I get it. In some ways, I'm glad I read this one earlier, because there have been kind of like a lot of spoilers kind of floating around for the series since I read this. And so I'm glad that I didn't have to worry about that I got to experience kind of like the full story the way it was intended. But on the other hand, I loved the reading journey of this series so much and was so invested in the books that I binged them super quickly. So definitely this is one that I wish I could go back and savor. Moving on to just straight up adult fantasy, one that I wish I could go back and read for the first time was The Way of Shadows by Brent Weeks, and this was a trip. So essentially in here you follow Kylar, or Azot, depending on which identity he's assuming at the time, and he is a street orphan, kind of living in some rough circumstances. But one day he decides, I'm really over this and I want to better my circumstances, and so he seeks out the master assassin in town, hoping to apprentice under him and be able to financially support himself. And this is really a story where he kind of uncovers the politics and the strange magic involved in the city he grew up in. It's a lot of kind of like slowly unpacking more and more layers to the story, which I also explained with Ogres I really enjoy. But again, in this case, you do have context for his character experience up front, and you do have a lot to kind of like keep you grounded in the story as you're uncovering that. I definitely didn't appreciate just how intricate the plot of this one would be going into it. And I definitely wish that I could read this again for the first time and kind of uncover how all of those aspects work together in a really intricate story. And definitely wish I knew to like pay super close attention to try and guess at things and figure things out. Also, I had a pretty like visceral reaction to some of the things that happen in here and some of the characters. And so that definitely is very memorable for me. This is definitely my favorite Brent Weeks book, and also was a very early experience I had with more of a darker tone in fantasy. So this definitely holds a special place in my heart for those reasons, and I definitely wish I could experience it again for the first time. The next fantasy we've got to talk about is The Sword of Kaigen by M.L. Wong. And essentially in here you have two main POVs, Misaki and Mamoru, and they are mother and son. And the story opens kind of slowly. You get a lot of world building for the Sword of Kaigen, which is where they live. It's a peninsula that has some corrupt government officials. They're sort of kind of like behind the times on a lot of things. They're not necessarily aware of the world around them. And this story really more picks up around the 1/3 mark when they are suddenly attacked. I didn't know going into this that the first third was going to be more kind of like info dumpy and a little bit rougher, with a lot of character backstory. And I wasn't necessarily that immersed in the story until the action started. But if I were to read this again for the first time, knowing that, I think I would have enjoyed the first chunk of this even more. But some of the reasons that this ultimately stood out to me and became a favorite happened in the second half of this. The second half is really kind of where we dug into the emotions and reactions of these characters in the challenging situations that they were put in and facing. You really kind of got to unpack and sit with the emotion that they were having over certain circumstances. And Emma Wong managed to wrench on so many of my heartstrings as I was reading this, for sure. Then further to that, this had one of the most cathartic moments in a book that I've ever read. Like, I was crying because it was so cathartic for me. And definitely that is a very memorable experience. This is one that I wish I could experience how impactful a book could be again for the first time. And yeah, definitely 5 years later, still vividly remember how I was feeling reading this. So if that doesn't tell you how much of a standout book this was for me, then I don't know what will. And my next book is one that you may be surprised about because I just read this, but this has become a favorite, and already I know that I wish I could experience this again for the first time because I loved my reading experience of it that much. And I'm of course talking about my favorite book of the year so far, Malice by John Gwynne, the first book in The Faithful and the Fallen. And essentially this is a Viking-inspired kind of military fantasy where you have a prophecy that's foretold with a lot of elements and aspects to it, and you're slowly discovering that some of the omens of this prophecy are kind of coming into place, and you have things like giant worms awakening and stones weeping blood, so you definitely know like something's gonna happen. But you spend a lot of time in this book in different perspectives in different parts of the world, kind of trying to piece together maybe who's who, how they each relate to the overall story or the prophecy at hand, and just kind of the reading experience of that and being able to have so many theories and guesses at things and then get some payoff and answers to some of those was just super enjoyable for me. And definitely it's one that I wish I could have that experience with all over again. So those were the books that, with my kind of current reading taste, I wish I could go back and experience again for the first time. But I do also have like a couple of honorable mentions from when I was more in my YA era. So like, these aren't necessarily things that I would love to reread again for the first time now, but if I read them again for the first time when I was more in a YA era of my reading, I would have absolutely loved that. And the first of those is The Kiss of Deception by Mary E. Pearson, the first book in the Remnant Chronicles. And essentially in here you have a young princess who is set up in an arranged marriage, but she runs away the night before and escapes that situation. And you have the prince that she spurned, as well as an assassin sent to kill her, trailing her. And you as the reader kind of see both of these characters and what they're up to, but you have no idea who is who. So in the first half of the first book, you get to spend a lot of time trying to piece and puzzle that together. They both eventually catch up with her, and it's really tense to see how things unfold and if you can guess correctly who was who. It was definitely a really fun and unique reading experience that I enjoyed. The next is the Selection series by Kiera Cass, and this is a fun one that is set in a dystopian society, and it's kind of essentially like The Bachelor but with a rebellion brewing in the background. So our main character is one of the girls chosen to be in the selection, or like this bachelor kind of situation with the Prince Maxon. And this is one where I was just so curious as to what was going to happen that I was on the edge of my seat reading for sure. I enjoyed the main character and kind of her reactions to all the other girls and the situations that she's put in. I liked her personality, but more than that, I just found this series like super addictive. I think I might have binged the whole thing in like a week, and definitely just really had a good time reading that one. And then of course the last one is a staple of a lot of people's YA reading journey, and that is The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins, specifically the original trilogy. I definitely didn't really enjoy Ballads of Songbirds and Snakes that much. I did like Sunrise on the Reaping, but mainly this original trilogy was one that I wish I could experience again for the first time if I still kind of like really loved YA books. So when I picked these up, I definitely didn't know a lot about it. The first movie had released, but I hadn't really heard anybody kind of talk about it or what it was about. It was something I found on Netflix on my own one day, watched the first movie, and had kind of some questions about certain moments in the story, or like wish I could dig deeper into the characters as the story was going on. And so I decided on a whim to buy it. Then I realized it was a trilogy and got the box set, and man, I binged that entire thing in a weekend. I was so invested in the story and needed to know what was going to happen next, especially in book 2 and 3 where the movies hadn't come out yet and I had no clue what to expect. But definitely there's something about the story in this one, how tense it is, and how much I wanted to know what was going to happen, that held a special reading experience for me. So those are all the books I had to talk about today that I wish I could experience again for the first time. I'm really curious to hear in the comments from you guys what other books fall into this category for you. What are some standout favorites that you wish you could read all over for the first time, and why do you feel that way about them? As always, thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe on your way out if you want to, and have a great day. Bye!